Thank you, Alan. Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for filling this room in a good way. I really appreciate the honor that Swansea is going to give me, and thanks to Matt Jones for leading the effort, and those of you who may have helped to arrange for this honor that I'll receive later in this week. For me, it's a particular satisfaction. As you indicate, I have a long history in my career of having advocated for the human side of technology. And in those days, imagine that it was not a popular notion. And in a day that was centered on technology, the advocacy of a human-centered approach required some devotion to it. And that left me in a satisfying way to push for fresh ideas and also the scientific methods that would support that. So my background comes from physics originally, but doing database and file design and optimization techniques and indexing methods. And I became 20% of an experimental psychologist in trying to study the way people use technology. So that's a little bit of the history that I thought I'd say just a bit about from the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, which just celebrated its 35th anniversary, now in its 8th director. So it's a well-established institution and provides a very happy model about how an interdisciplinary community can work together. It's supported by computer science and the rapidly growing School of Information Studies at University of Maryland, but with partnerships around campus with other groups and the wonderfully titled Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities, MIT. If you visit our page, you'll find almost 1,000 technical reports, 200 videos, 200 project pages, and further information about that. So you can learn more about where we've come from and where we're going. Now, just a little of the kind of things you were saying, and thank you for mentioning direct manipulation, because it was a vision in 1981 and 82 that shaped my thinking for all of these things, and for many other things. So, you know, one of those things was the idea of the link, that certain words are highlighted in light blue on the screen, and you touch them. That was a radical idea in 1984 when we created that, and we ran a dozen experiments about different ways of doing it, because it was a strange kind of thing to be able to simply point rather than type a number. The systems of those days required a keyboard, and you would type a number to follow the next link. You look puzzled by that idea. It's hard to conceive of that even, but the fact is someone did need to invent the visual representation of the link. Of course, the idea of the link goes back to Vannevar Bush in 1945, Ted Nelson, Doug Engelbart, and many others, but our work was to make a visual interface that you could actually touch, click, and so on. We also developed this strange little keyboard. At the time, touchscreens were available, and the recommendation was that buttons needed to be 9 inches. 1-inch squares, and so we made a keyboard that was 9-inch wide, which you could type on. And then we made a 7-inch one, and a 5-inch one, and a 3-inch one. And to get the precision of a 3-inch keyboard required that when you put your finger down, you got a cursor above your finger that you could move around, and it activates when you lift off. And indeed, that strategy of lift-off, which we published at the COD conference in 1988, is what you have on your Apple phones. Not everyone knows it, but if you hover on the letter I, you get 6 or 8 variations of symbols, and it activates on lift-off. So lift-off was a strategy that made it work, and Steve Jobs visited our lab. I was, as you say, a consultant for Apple, worked with Apple people, and got to see how that idea went to work. We also developed home control devices and many other items, and even the idea of tagging photos. You'd have a list of your family or friends, and you would drag them and drop them right there. The idea that a label could be somehow dragged and dropped was also a fresh idea. And for that, I have a patent, which the university then sold. So I had these experiences, and it's relevant really to my talk tomorrow. I think, Simon, 2 p.m.?
2 p.m.
Where is that?
Science Center.
Science Center at 2 p.m. That's 2 years ago when I was here, I spoke about the book, The New ABCs of Research, and this takes it further to the twin win model of research. And I just got yesterday, for this purpose, the data about the performance of Swansea University authors for the papers. And it's a rather remarkable extreme version. I've done this for 6 major universities in the UK and 18 other universities in the US, Canada, and so on. And there's a remarkable pattern, which I'll show you and briefly, not to make it extreme, but if you publish an author, if you publish a paper as a single author, you'll get a certain number of publications. If you work with colleagues in your department, you'll get twice as many. If you work with colleagues in your country, you get 3 times. If you work internationally, you get 4 times. But here's the kicker. This is about to be published. If one of your co-authors is from business or government, you get 7 times as many citations. It's a startling result. And we'll talk tomorrow more about why that might be and why it might be misleading or all the reasons why you might want to discount it. Now, the data I got for Swansea yesterday was pretty startling, and we'll take a look at it, because Swansea has an unusual pattern in that actually the papers authored by single authors have a fairly low number of citations. The ones with international authors, collaborators, have more. But the ones with business collaborators have larger than any other university I studied. And tomorrow we'll discuss about why that might have been the case. I'm just started. Maybe you know which papers or which authors. But Swansea has a unique pattern already, which I think is on your agenda for the Foundry and for the other directions, of engaging with industry and working on real problems to produce better theories. That's the secret of tomorrow's talk. Working on real problems gives you better theories, and that's what you alluded to in your introduction. So that's tomorrow at 2 o'clock. But we always worked on real problems, on things that matter. And we did things in the lab, in controlled experiments, but we also got out the door. And that's the secret that increasingly we recognize. Working on real problems, on real data, in real environments, like going to Mumbai and installing technologies that are tested in place, gives you an advantage. It doesn't always work, but it gives you an advantage and the potential that your theories will be stronger and your papers will be stronger. And the goal of that research is the twin win, that you get published papers with breakthrough theories and validated solutions that are ready for dissemination. So that's what we'll come to tomorrow. And it has influenced my work all along. And these are some of the visualization works Bob Laramie knows well. The tree maps, for example, this is showing stock market data of 500 stocks, and the color, the green indicates stocks are rising, red indicates those that are falling over the last day. The area for each stock represents the market capitalization, so Apple is the biggest, there's Google, Facebook, Walmart, so on, Johnson & Johnson, Exxon. And they're organized in 11 industry segments, and you can see some segments on this day. It was a pretty good green day, but the utility segments were red. So these kind of patterns become apparent or understandable when you visually organize the data in an appropriate way. Our work on Spotfire led to a commercial success story. I served on the board of directors for 5 years, so I came to understand how that works. And I hope, and I know you're working on visualization here, and Bob Laramie and Marchambault and others here are working on that effort. There are great success stories like Tableau is the leading commercial tool in that domain, but there are many others. We worked on network visualization through a project of open source project called NodeXL, and more recently on medical records, which brought me close to Harold Thimbleby's work. And this was a study about the patterns of errors in hospital emergency rooms. Okay? And so we've had these projects, and again, the guidance I'll make for tomorrow's talk is that if you work on real problems with hospitals, with different real users, you will find better solutions to the problems you face. Okay. So today's talk, though, focuses on the current obsession of big data and algorithms and how are we going to put it to work. Now, a lot of literature is about the tsunami of data, the flood, the torrent, drowning in data. This is amusing to me because I see from, as you know, the previous project I showed you, we're all driven by having access to large amounts of data. I see it as quite wonderful. So rather than the torrent and the flood and the wave, I believe it's the rich, nurturing flow of water that we need to be able to understand the world around us. And so the good news is we have, for the first time in history, remarkable amounts of data coming and becoming available, and we have the tools that enable us to understand that data, to make better decisions, to build a better world. That's our goal always. Not the technology, but to make a better world. Okay, so I've wrestled with this a long time, and part of my background is the book Design the User Interface, first edition, 1986. And in that book, which cataloged at the time the state of human-computer interaction, competing with Alan Dix's book and others as well, but there was a section called Balancing Automation and Human Control. And this was taken from the current themes, particularly Thomas Sheridan's 10 stages of automation, where he described fully manual control, fully automatic control. And he was invigorated by the dreams of artificial intelligence that were emerging already, and the idea that automation was the goal. And the language grew and grew to the point that not just automation, but autonomy became the obsession, that the machine should do it by itself. And the elimination of human control was a tragic mistake that has produced deadly results. There are already at least 33 deaths by robots, which are poorly understood as their cause, okay? Because of the exaggerated belief of excessive automation. Similarly, those who follow airplane crashes and try to understand their source, often it is because there's insufficient feedback from the pilots, the current state of the automation. Harold has been exemplary in the medical world in tracking down and understanding the ways excessive automation, poor design, and bugs have produced deadly results. So we're past the point about talking about games anymore. It's not about chess or Go or playing games. We're talking now about the big data applications that not only drive business decisions and make e-commerce possible and offer you selections of movies and other things, but influence their life-critical effects. Okay? And that's the issue. So for me, as I confronted this, in the 6th edition of the book, which came out a couple of years ago, that section got a different name, or it's been evolving over the 6 editions of the book. And I use the phrase now, ensuring human control while increasing automation. Now that may sound like a little paradox, but that's where I'm trying to find a safe space to stand. And that's what I'm talking about, safe space to stand. What is it that will produce safe applications of life-critical and other applications? So that's where we're going. I will return to this theme and try to clarify it for you. And the essential message will be by clarifying human responsibility and ensuring human control, comprehension, we can then build safer and more ambitious systems, whether we're talking about driverless cars or aviation or medical. Okay, so I'm not alone in suggesting this, and I remind you that even key design guidelines remain, and Apple's design guidelines says that users should be in control. People, not apps, are in control. It's a pretty clear statement. Flexibility. Systems should offer users complete, fine-grained control over data. So this is very influential, and equally the Microsoft guidelines, which have both been very influential in the development of these technologies, make a strong point that is human control, not the levels of autonomy that are suggested by some. Now, this issue has become a big public policy issue, as you mentioned, and the book I strongly recommend. It's a wonderfully well-written book by Kathy O'Neill, PhD in mathematics from Harvard, worked on Wall Street in algorithm design and so on, but has written this really pioneering book, and she talks about weapons of math destruction, how big data increases inequality and threatens democracy. It's pretty strong language, and she's concerned about the situations in which algorithms have opacity, that is, they're black boxes, you can't see into them, they're used at scale, and that they can produce data. So this is the shift from the mindset of games and small projects to serious work. These algorithms slam doors in the faces of millions of people, often for the flimsiest reason. They offer no appeal. They're unfair. And she's talking about systems that offer loans, bank mortgages. Okay, they offer jobs, or they decide on parole of criminals. And she goes through about a dozen different fields where there are large algorithms, widely used, so that's the scale, but they're opaque. The parole-seeking prisoner who would like to get out is told, no, you can't be paroled because the algorithm says no. And there's no appeal to that, and there's no way of getting an explanation of what this prisoner might do in order to receive parole. So she says they're unfair, and algorithms can be biased, harmful, and deadly. So it's that kind of strong language, and that's where I want to go. But I hope to offer you a vision about how we might respond to this, and I'm ready for the kind of engaging, challenging discussion. Now, this topic has become huge, and I would say once a week I receive a report of some kind by some national or international body that deals with this issue. This one was a little earlier, and I was really troubled by this one, because this one talks about AI in the old-fashioned way. They say, human minds and computers are the same category, they just differ in certain properties. And for me, that's wrong. I believe in the unbounded creative capacities of people. For me, computers are no more intelligent than a wooden pencil. Okay? And I think it's important to be extreme language in both cases, but that's where I want to go. To try to open up the space to question the issue that people are computers, or computers are almost people, they're almost conscious, and say, no, there's actually a different way to see the world. That people are very different, and we need to respect people's unique abilities, and that computers are merely tools with no more intelligence than a wooden pencil. So the paper I like best, if you're going to read one, go for this one. IEEE had about 20 subcommittees, more than 200 people who contributed to this 130-page. It's wonderfully written with fresh language that asserts clearly that the goal is human well-being, not technology. And so it takes strong positions about autonomous weapons systems, certainly, but industrial and other systems. This one, from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, talks about the malicious use of artificial intelligence for forecasting prevention and mitigation. The World Wide Web Foundation has that one. There's just more than I can. The European Union has several statements. And this latest batch carries on these themes as well. So I'm happy to leave the slides and all these references for you. But that's where the discussion is going. There's a worldwide effort. The European GDPR has also contributed to the worldwide attention, and there is a positive movement. And there are good forces within the AI community that are also going down the road of the ethically aligned design and the strategies that I'll describe for you. So I've already made my position clear that the key message is human responsibility for failures and for successes. And if you clarify responsibility, you will accelerate safety. That's the message. And so now the question is, how do we get to do those things? What are the design principles? Well, this document lays out a good starting point. This is the ACM in the US and EU, which put this thing. Don't read this here, because we're going to take a look at them. But this was their now influential statement on algorithmic transparency and accountability. And there are 7 principles. And I contributed to writing of these, although I'm going to take a rather critical point about the way this has been written. First point, awareness. Owners, designers, builders, users, and other stakeholders should be aware of possible biases and harm. A good statement, a fair opening statement. And it was my encouragement to shift from this looser language originally that says, we should be aware. The we words trouble me. So if we clarify who are the people we're talking about. And it says, should be aware of possible biases. Yes, you should be aware of possible biases. Well, how do you know when someone's aware? It does not have a testable measure. It's not scientific in the way that I would like it to be. So, good starting point, but could be better. Second, access and redress. Regulators should adopt mechanisms that enable questioning and redress. Do we have examples of what that looks like? Do we know when they've done enough? I believe that people in industry, government, and elsewhere are well-intentioned. And what they want to know is what they should do, that they should reach the satisfactory level of performance in what they're doing. And so we, as technology developers, need to help them by giving them a set of identifiable principles that they know what to do. Accountability. Institutions should be held responsible, even if it is not feasible to explain how the algorithms produce their results. Who is going to hold them responsible? We don't know. We don't have a clear mechanism of how this works. Is it the insurance companies? Is it government regulators? Is it the journalists? Is it some public body? We don't know. Okay? But again, a good idea. Explanation. This is probably the largest area to get into. Systems and institutions that use algorithmic decision-making are encouraged to produce explanations of the procedures and decisions. Well, the GDPR specifies that that's important. Didn't quite lay out how to make that happen either, but people have responded and are taking a look at it. So how do we shift from are encouraged to knowing when sufficient levels of explanations are available? What is it that we're looking for? Now, there's a positive movement around this. So you have at least two items I'd like to cite or encourage you. In the US, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, has a program called Explainable AI, XAI. And there are 11 projects supported within that, which are seeking different solutions to this problem. At the same time, within the AI community, there are well-intelligent people in a wonderful group called FATML, F-A-T, Fair, Accountable, and Transparent Machine Learning, FATML. Look at their website. There are already 4 years of conference papers that are deep technical papers and show that there are ways to move the technological strategies forward. Those in the AI community who have said that our algorithms are so complicated we could never explain them, are really, it's shameful that they take that position. We should be looking and expecting algorithms that are explainable and accountable. 5, data provenance. Algorithm builders should maintain a description. I think you've got the pitch, you understand where I'm coming at. What does it mean to maintain a description? What does the description look like? Okay? Who keeps it? Who has access to it? If the company who manufactures the tool is the only one with access to it, it's not quite sufficient. We want to make sure it's open and publicly accessible. So there's many, many nuanced issues in this field. Auditability. And here's one where this is my strongest advocacy. Models, algorithms, data, and decisions should be reported so they can be audited. To me, this is the simplest, most straightforward technical improvement. Most algorithms do not leave an audit trail. By contrast, in aviation, we have the flight data reporter that for a modern plane crossing the Atlantic leaves about 1 terabyte of data. And there are tools for analyzing what happened. When did the engine start getting hot? When did the cabin pressure drop? All these kind of analyses help give a better understanding retrospectively about the problems that occur. Increasingly, automobiles have such recording devices, but the accessibility to them is unclear in the law. So they have been used in legal cases at times to prove that the driver was driving too fast or improperly. But I think that's the main thing to look for, audit trails for algorithms that do more than just capture everything, but they provide a meaningful way to
retrospectively organize, understand the processes, so that when an error has occurred, you could change the software and then demonstrate that that error will not reoccur. And in fact, we have examples such as the last year's case of the Tesla, which killed the driver. And I read the report, about 60 pages, of the National Transportation Safety Board that described this. And it's impressively thorough in their analysis, and yet their 14 recommendations include this comment that says audit trails need to be improved so that we can go back and find out what really happened. And the final one, validation and testing, is to use rigorous methods to validate these models. We have a well-developed field of validation and verification in software that could be modified for these kind of situations. So we would have a set of test cases for each different industry, the car industry, for medical, for legal, and for banking, that would enable the developers to test out their algorithms against the set of test cases, and then when failures occurred, new test cases would be added, but they could validate that the improved version handled the test cases. So this is a starting point, and it shows how we in the technical community, those who work in ACM and the European ACM, have provided leadership in developing these ideas. So I return again to this issue, this subtle question about how do we ensure human control while increasing automation. And so I approach this from a social point of view and talk about the idea of independent oversight. And this argument is in a short opinion piece in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, so you can take a look at it. And I had studied for several years the strategies for technology oversight in many fields, and I came to understand how it works, how social processes can be harnessed to improve technologies. And there are, you're familiar with every corporation in the US and the UK who's registered for trading on public exchanges has to have an internal audit committee and advisory boards and external audits of a stipulated. So accounting firms, these are maybe imperfect, but they provide a mechanism. University accreditation, NSF and EPSRC advisory boards, and even the peer-reviewed journals provide some form of independent oversight. And then we'll look at the examples of zoning boards, planning commissions, environmental impact statements, and then in many technology-based organizations, there are independent oversights. And the prime one that we're going to get to is the National Transportation Safety Board, which I proposed in this talk here, a National Algorithmic Safety Board. And that would have the same flavor as the Transportation Safety Board. The Transportation Safety Board is unique in the US in that it is supported by the US Congress, but it's not a part of any one of the agencies, not commerce or transportation or defense. It's separate, and that's part of the independence. It was set up that way, and over the years it's become a very trusted source, and particularly respected for aviation, accident investigations. And as a result, the civil aviation around the world is remarkably safe in terms of the travel for passengers. So there's three forms of oversight that I want to describe, and the challenge will be to take these existing methods and weave them into the algorithmic world that we're so familiar with. The first is planning oversight, and this is a meeting of a council that's in New Jersey somewhere in the US. If you propose to build a house or an office building or a commercial building, you appear before the zoning commission and say, here's what I want to build. And there are a lot of rules, of course, about fire safety, earthquake, floods, and so on. And you say, well, my building plan adheres to all these things. And there's an adversarial discussion. The planning board then says, well, looks good, but you're proposing 6 stories. Our zoning commission would limit you to 4 stories, but we give you the permission to build larger. There's many rules you have to follow. In the US, for every place in a building, there must be 2 forms of egress within 150 feet. And as many such rules, these have been developed over years by the insurance industries and by public acceptance in the construction industries as well. So you propose to build a house or a factory, you appear and you get approval, and then you build a house, and then the inspector arrives to make sure you've done what you said you're going to do and gives you a certificate of occupancy. Now, for algorithms, it's not exactly the same, but, and I'm not talking about algorithms written in universities or small companies, but if a major bank or institution wishes to build an algorithm that they'll use around the world, remember, scale, opacity, and damage, or something substantial, then they would appear and propose the idea of the algorithm and talk about the ways they've engineered in the safety that I described, and I will describe, and they would get approval to do it. The second form of independent oversight is continuous monitoring. This is the Federal Reserve Board, and they supervise what happens at every bank. And this is an expensive form of independent oversight. It costs a lot of money. In the US, also pharmaceutical manufacturing and meat and food production are continuously monitored by people who are in place in the factories of the banks and so on. So this is an effective form, but it is expensive. Now, the more commonly known one is the retrospective analysis. An airplane crash occurs, and the NTSB flies in and conducts its investigation. They have teams that are available, they've developed the methods and the technologies to investigate these kind of accidents. Okay? So, the pattern I see here, over time, there's 3 ways you can do independent oversight. There's planning oversight in advance before you do anything. There's the continuous monitoring, and then retrospective analysis when disasters occur. There are real questions about the design of such independent oversight, the degree of independence, whether the investigative arms have subpoena power, whether companies are required to cooperate or not, and so on, and the powers to enforce. If you make recommendations and nobody does anything, it's not very effective. In the US, the NTSB makes its recommendations, and a year later or 6 months, there's a hearing to see if changes were put in place. In every one of the publicly listed corporations in the US, the recommendations are made, and a year later, when the next audit is to be done, if they haven't satisfied the previous recommendations, there's a hearing or a discussion. Now, these sound like complicated processes, but they produce public discussion of these important systems. If these systems are important, if they're life critical, if they're financially critical, it's a reasonable investment. So, we come back to this theme, ensuring human control while increasing automation by way of this algorithm safety board. And there's a bunch of points that I want to make here, and then we'll come back for more discussion. So, the first thing for independent oversight is open and adversarial reviews, not closed, but open ones where there's another side to the issue. And there's a social process of discussions, evidence-based where possible, and some judging party who decides how this will happen. Transparency, to open the black box of these systems. We recently, our research was on tools for making recommendations about medical treatment paths. And we had studied the ways patients and physicians make decisions. And in the environment of automatic decision-making systems, the decision got made quickly, but the users and the patients, the clinicians and patients, did not always trust the result because they didn't understand how it happened. So compliance was lower. If the patients and clinicians were engaged in the process as the black box was opened, it took longer, but they were more likely to comply with the process. Accountability, open failure reporting. Whether it's in the medical field, and Harold's been a hero in pushing for that, and others like Ross Capel, about having reporting, open reporting of failures. By contrast, the companies such as in the US Epic, do not allow people like Harold or me to see their programs in operation. They will not allow us to use a screen print in a published paper. They will not give us a demo unless we sign a non-disclosure agreement. They prohibit physicians from talking about the failures in the use of these electronic health records. It's rather shocking. And the last point is that for a lot of these medical systems, the contracts specify hold harmless. This is a carryover from the early days of computing, when computing was seen as kind of a novel thing and uncertain with bugs and so on, and therefore software companies were in a different kind of industry where they were held harmless. They could not be sued even if their programs had bugs. This has remained in place. And it's time for the AI and algorithms community to grow up out of the adolescent game playing phase and take on the mature responsibility of dealing with life-critical decisions. Okay, so now I've described a set of things. The first are audit trails and analysis tools based on the idea of a flight data report. Modular design to support explanation, such as in debugging tools. The modularity of systems will allow us to identify which components have potentially produced the damage, whereas the large systems that are built now are so complicated and intertwined that it's difficult to tease out where the problem has even occurred. So modular design, I think, will be an important part of it. And it's like, debugging tools have supported that for a long time. Visualization tools for understanding algorithms. I think the best source on this is Fernando Viegas at Google, has shown how visualization tools help designers of algorithms understand how those algorithms actually work, make them run more rapidly, more effectively. There's a nice set of work in that area. Data quality and bias tests for training data. That becomes a big issue here. The biasing in these systems, whether it's gender bias or racial or ethnic or religious or all the many, many forms of bias. I mentioned the paper by Ricardo Baeza Yates earlier about bias. He lists many more than I thought of, about a dozen forms of bias that occur. It's a June article from the Communication, the ACM. And then benchmark data sets for algorithm validation. So I'm putting forward that there's a positive view here. And the goal is, if you want to build safety, the necessary part is to ensure responsibility, to clarify responsibility. And again, if you want safety, you need to go after responsibility. Clarifying responsibility is my path for making systems that are safe. And that's my closing. We recently celebrated our 35th anniversary. It's a group at University of Maryland. I hope you come visit us on our webpage or when you come to College Park. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to engage in further discussion. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
I'll do the reminder again about tomorrow's one, because I was supposed to remind as I was doing the introduction. Right. So tomorrow at 2 p.m. there'll be second talk in Science Central. And is there, there'll be food type stuff, there'll be some. Will there even be a cup of tea there? Okay, so so I'm going to put some questions for a while, and then after that I'll send you back to eat more food. Okay. Who would like to?
Yes.
I got a question which I hope I can phrase lucidly. What are your thoughts on the ideas of complex deep learning machines? It's very difficult to understand why they make certain decisions.
Right. Shut them down.
Okay. But if I give you the suggestion that, for example, I don't know, I'll make up the numbers for examples. There are 10 in every 100 people who die on the roads because of human mistakes. And we know that they're allowed on the road after 20 hours of training and an hour's test. And off you go. And then we have a machine that drives a car built by whomever that's had, a couple of million miles test, a couple of million miles training, and kills 1 in every 100. But we don't know why it kills the 1 in every 100, but what we do know is it kills 9 people less in every 100 than the human error. Can we just accept that and trust it?
There's 2 points to that. First of all, I'm all in favor of driverless cars and high degrees of automation. Okay, but I want to assert human control. And I do not accept the idea that, well, there'll be a safer tool that we don't understand. It's unlikely to me to be the way it works. If we understand how it works, we're more likely to make it safer. I don't trust the belief that because it's so complicated, it will be safe.
No, it's not because
No.
it's complicated, it's because it's proven to be safe.
Well, if that is really true.
But we don't know how.
Well, I think you will get to a safer version if you know how. Okay, that's the premise here. And the evidence from Google and Fernando Viegas and other examples in the FATML community is that that is unquestionably true. So, I mean, the examples go very deep in the parole-based system. The current company that delivers the main parole system in the US called Compass. Okay? They say it's a black box, first of all, from contractual basis, we won't let you know, but anyway, it's so complicated. Cynthia Rudin at Duke University took the same situation, the same data, and produced a 5-line statement of Boolean conditions that had exactly the same criteria. Okay? It was understandable, it was comprehensible, and allowed then for improvements to be made in performance of that system. So I think the evidence mounts that if you make it explainable, you're more likely to get a safer system. Let me take one other example. In automobiles, the airbags save about 2,500 lives a year in the US. But in the earliest days, they killed inadvertently more than 100 children because of improperly triggered airbag. Now, anticipating that and understanding why might have led to better prevention. So I think again and again, we want to use high degrees of automation. I'm all in favor of it. I'd like it to be reliable and tested. My belief is that the way to get that reliability is through more comprehensible algorithms. And for me, the principle of comprehensible, predictable, and controllable. If it becomes unpredictable, shut it down, is what I say. So the examples on that side are the Google Flu Trends system. Very nicely developed system from 2009 to 2013 to predict the outbreaks of flus in various cities. And it was celebrated widely as a wonderful success of AI. If you read the report in 2013 in the journal Science from AAAS, David Laser and others lay out very clearly how this went bad. And it went bad because there were many, many changes going on in the system, and that the users had no idea what was happening, and the conditions that worked 4 years ago were no longer true. And they didn't understand that. They didn't predict it. They didn't see it. And so I think if you look at the studies of failures, you will see, as I do in aviation and other cases, they become because of lack of transparency, lack of understanding. And I think I can't prove it to you, but neither can the other case be proved. I think you'll get more quickly to safer systems if you build according to the principle of comprehensibility.
Who came up first? I'll go with that one.
I think I can imagine that what you do might be pushed through if it's about real safety where people are endangered. But I see, I think this is much more important somehow when you look at a bank rejecting a credit card application because of a mistake, or even invoice remittable. If you want to fly to the US, you might be rejected because your name is Mohammed or something like this. So, and when it's about companies, I have the feeling what they immediately say is this will give us an economic disadvantage. When it's about safety, they will see, okay, yes, it saves us from big damage, but if it's about rejecting a credit card application, how can you convince?
I think what you're saying is you're voicing the belief that any kind of regulation or control or limitation will limit innovation in business, will make it harder for business. But I don't think the evidence is there to support that case. I think our friends will be the insurance industry, where for industrial manufacturing or for banking, insurance companies will not provide insurance for systems which are so unpredictable. They will want a kind of better understanding and more reliability built into those systems. I think there will be a future direction, and I think the positive signs are that the technology advocates are showing the ways that what you're asking for and what you're asking for can be accomplished. It's not an unreasonable request. But so I do sometimes get angry that some members of the AI community don't want to be challenged this way. They don't want to have to face the reality of making comprehensible, predictable, and controllable systems. Another question, and then Howard?
So your algorithm safety board, if you look at this from a pragmatic point of view, so obviously small businesses, university students, algorithms do not need to consider oversight. Who holds the responsibility for deciding if an algorithm is going to be oversight?
Well, it's a similar situation to zoning boards. If you wish to build a little tree house for your children in the back of the house, it's not a problem. But if you're going to build a structure with electricity and with water, there are certain limitations that the community decides. And the community will make a local decision. So different industries, in medical, you may have one decision. In banking, you may have another kind of decision about the degree. But I think Cathy O'Neill's opacity scale and damage are good measures. If a system has no chance of producing damage, financial or physical, then we don't need to control so much of what happens. But if there is threat to human life or threat to destruction, we need to be concerned.
I really agree with everything you've said, except you didn't really define what an algorithm is. And you painted the picture as an algorithm as something complicated, like I want to borrow some money from my bank and they're going to make a decision. But there are lots of very simple things that go on, like you take some money out of the cash machine and I get charged for it. That's a very, you don't even need to invoke AI to explain that. So there are things called safety integrity levels, which look at how often you can cope with an accident and how catastrophic it is. So civil airplane, it's unacceptable to have an accident during its lifetime, and accidents are catastrophic. So that means the software you develop on an aircraft has to be done to a high level of integrity. Whereas, I don't know, the university marking system, it doesn't matter if it goes wrong every year because students complain and we can sort it out. It's not catastrophic. So you have a different skill level for that.
Agreed.
So,
just let me go back to your definitional point. I did choose the word algorithms here. I had much struggle, and there's people who talk about whether it's systems, algorithms, or complexes of systems. It is true. The world of technology has many, many, many components, and
we need a mature assessment of the algorithms, like in building.
yeah.
I can't build a skyscraper. Very few people are allowed to do that and have to go through a whole rigorous process. But I can knock up a garage, and I would certainly expect to be able to knock up a barbecue without anybody paying attention to them.
So there are.
The same true for algorithms.
This is true in the computing field. There have been various efforts over the years to certify programmers, as we do have professional engineers. And in general, those people in the computing field have rejected the idea of having a certification process for programmers. I disagree with that position. I do think having, the idea that a programmer is a certified professional, is responsible for their actions, and has to act at a different level than the average person should be put into place. But that's where we are. So we have a lot of ways of attacking the problem. I mean, it could be just the study of the algorithm, it's the system, the company that provides the system, and then it's the people who build it, maintain it, and evolve.
Well, all of the organisations you talked about, FDA, NTSB, have highly certified people in them.
Yes.
For good reasons. So we need highly certified people in. Not all programmers need to be certified because they may want to build a barbecue.
Right.
Some of them want to build safety critical systems.
That's right.
They should be certified.
That's right. I think that's and they should have professional pride. Getting certification raises their status and maybe their salary. And I think we should approach the social system of construction software. I might say one other point for those who are thinking from the legal point of view. The people I talk to who are lawyers tell me there is no need for additional law to accommodate AI technologies, that the liability laws are clear enough. When a plane does have an accident, we know we have to study the operator of the plane, we have to study the pilot, we have to study the company, who did the maintenance, and trace back to the design, and try to assess the components. It's not easy to do, but that's the way the legal system has worked, and they see no reason that this can't be done for a complex system. The part that I suggest before, whether an algorithm or a tool or a complex system is involved, software systems are exceedingly complex and have many, many components. So actually tracing, I've presented it as a much simpler problem than the reality. Real systems have many, many components, and trying to understand which component produced the problem, which ensemble of components, is difficult. That's why the modular design approach to me seems central.
Well, when an aeroplane crashes, Boeing doesn't say, oh, it's terribly complicated, we're not responsible for
Correct,
it.
that's right.
They're responsible for
That's right, that's a mature
The responsibility is...
I do think, we have to grow out of this adolescent phase, as I say, in play.
If you choose to use an API you don't look at, you're responsible.
Right. So, it's
one
more?
Yeah, so as a clarification, I was thinking in engineering, traditionally design things have often used linear characteristics, certainly don't use complex feedback, and basically avoid, which is the avoid until we understood the way they behave, we avoided using certain things. Whereas in medicine, and I don't mean the devices, but actually in pharmaceuticals, often our understanding of what's going on in the body is pretty ropey, but we assess them from the outside, which is more like Matt's argument. So it's, I thought it was interesting actually in different parts of the world, different disciplines. So engineering basically avoids things that are difficult and only designs, but deliberately does so in order to design things it understands. Whereas in medicine, we're basically saying we can't really understand it all, so we're operating outside.
That's a bit of an extreme statement. I mean, in my study of different approaches to oversight, in the US, the Food and Drug Administration and other boards review the applicability of certain medications, medical devices for certain situations. The issue that Harold and I have struggled with, in the US, the Food and Drug Administration deals with medications and medical devices. However, electronic health record systems are not medical devices. And those of us who have tried to either extend the scope of the Food and Drug Administration's efforts or to redefine electronic health record systems as being medical devices have yet to succeed. The current atmosphere is to reduce regulation. And so we have an industry that is deadly, is daily producing deadly outcomes. Deadly by Design is Harold's new book, right? So I think these are important issues of our time, and I do encourage you, I'm pleased that it's strong turnout here. I hope these are different level of discussion of issues than usual in a technical environment, but I hope they give you a way to reflect and maybe shape your work so that you can be proud and responsible for the tools that you design.
I did interrupt. Was there a last question you've noticed?
No, are there another question? One more?
So,
Yes, please.
Well, when you talk about modular design, what do you mean above the standard software engineering methods of modular software design?
There are many different versions. I didn't go to specify. I found that the bugging tools tend to push programmers towards modular designs that will allow them to localize where problems occur. So they can identify which sections of code were possible. So that you would define interface boundaries between the modules, and you could then trap them and expect value certification pre- and post-conditions, if you will, at the boundaries between the modules. So for some cases, these may be many millions of modules, but typically we think of a more modest and manageable set of modules. And there may be a hierarchy of modules as well, but the point is it should be designed so that you can narrow the focus of attention to see where an error has produced damage. And then the part of that is to be able to replace one module with another one and verify that the replaced module deals with the problem in a better way. All right, thank you very much. I'll be glad to stay longer and talk with others, but I appreciate it.
In 2 days' time, Jenny Pierce will be here, and
She'll be talking about citizen science. She'll be talking about citizen science.
Citizen science. And Friday will be the graduation ceremony, but also Ben and Jenny are around. Jenny's arriving tomorrow, isn't it? So around for the rest of the week, and I think already have a fairly full schedule, but I'm sure there are some points in certainly around the talks where